Those days. I remember those days.
Hello, vinyl community. This is Tommy, and welcome to another musical adventure. Today's adventure is called Best in Mono, and it's brought to you by your friend and my friend, Americana Sam. Now, why are we blaming Sam for this? Well, I'll tell you why. Sam gave me the idea for the video, and at first he mentioned it, and I kind of laughed it off, and I thought a little bit more about it, and I said, why not do this video? Because it's kind of fun. So those of you who follow me on social media know that I've used the hashtag Best in Mono. Where does that phrase come from? What does it mean? I'm going to tell you about it. Why do I use Best in Mono? Now, I'm not going to get into a big audiophile shootout, mono versus stereo. We're going to talk a little bit about some of that stuff throughout the video. One of the other things about this video that I think kind of triggered Sam to suggest that I do it was the recent reissue of, or the recent announcement of the reissue of Pet Sounds, these different versions that are coming out. There are a million videos in the VC that are better at explaining it than I am. So this isn't by no means the authoritative video on mono or stereo. These are just my thoughts. And I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time. I'm going to give you the origin of the phrase. I'm going to talk a little bit about some mono records and share a few with you. And maybe give you an idea if you want to talk a little bit about it yourself. You can jump on the thread as well. Now, we got that out of the way. Let's talk about liking, subscribing, you know, all that stuff we always tell you. Subscribe to the channel if you're new here. If you like what you see, doesn't cost you anything. Hit the button. You know the drill. So now, let's get to the getting. Best in Mono. Where does the phrase come from? It comes from the Byrds, Younger Than Yesterday. Now, they don't use that phrase on this record. This is the Sundazed mono edition of the album. That came out about 20 years ago now. I love these mono reissues that came out. It was the first time they had come out. But the reason I'm showing this record is because many years ago, me and my friend Sean, hi Sean, we went and we saw Roger McGuinn, and we did this little after party with McGuinn and met him. Of course, we brought albums to sign. I brought my copy of Easy Rider, and Sean brought a mono copy of Younger Than Yesterday. And when he handed it to Roger to sign, and we were just chatting and talking, he said, I got a mono one for you. And Roger was talking about it, and he said, you know, they sound better in mono, and he was going on about how much he preferred the mono mixes. And when he signed the record, he signed it Best in Mono, Roger McGuinn, which was pretty cool. And I always kind of admired that and thought it was fun. So I kind of took the phrase, and so every time I spin a mono record and share it on my social media pages, I write hashtag Best in Mono. So the credit for the phrase is Roger McGuinn. And I love that he came up with that. And so there's the phrase Best in Mono. Younger Than Yesterday. So this was the album I was spinning the other day, this mono edition, and when I reconsidered Sam's suggestion of doing a mono video. Now, we were talking a little bit about the Pet Sounds reissues that have come out, and I will unequivocally say that to me, Pet Sounds is an album that is supposed to be experienced in mono. This is an original Capitol. It's got a little chew on the side, but it plays okay. And yeah, this is an album that was meant to be mixed in mono. It was mixed in mono. It was meant to be played in mono. The first stereo mix of this album came out in 1997 with the Pet Sound Sessions box set, and it was the first true stereo mix. Now, Capitol did this horrendous thing back in the 60s, and you've seen it across the top of the records, duophonic stereo. Basically, that means it was mono reprocessed for stereo, and this album in particular, to me, sounds absolutely atrocious. and duophonic. It was not meant to be played that way. Now, the stereo mix for Pet Sounds, when it finally came out in the mid-90s, it was done digitally. There were some corrections done. Brian Wilson was involved in the stereo mix along with Mark Lynette. But the mono mix of Pet Sounds has always been, to me, the real Pet Sounds. I think that's just the way Brian mixed it. Now, Brian, those of you who know, he was deaf in one ear. He really only truly understood mono. But that was the thing, like car stereos, everything back then was in mono. And so when guys were mixing in mono, they were sort of taking control of the listening experience and in control of the mix. Stereo was such a new fangled thing that a lot of stereo mixes were just beyond the artists themselves. They were like, well, why would you want to mix that way? For example, like if you have a left and a right speaker and you put the left speaker closer to you than the right speaker, you sit between them and maybe one's here and one's there, it's gonna have an effect on the mix and the way you perceive the music. Particularly back then, because what they did, they panned everything hard right and hard left. You'd have the vocals and the drums coming out of the left side, and you'd have the guitar and bass coming out of the right side, and then you may have a couple of background vocals mixed in the center, and depending on where you were in the room, that was the mix you were going to hear. Going back to my pal Sean, I remember there was a thing, we were at someone's house and they had this really cool setup where they had the speakers in each room. So every room had sound in it, so you could play a record, or you could play sound, or play a CD, or whatever it was, in any, and play it and pipe it into the entire house. Well, the problem was, if you had the right channel in one bedroom and the left channel in another bedroom, you were only hearing one half of the music, particularly if it was a 60s record. Now, when they got into the 70s and later, the stereo mixes got a little more sophisticated, and it was not quite that way. But in the 60s, it very much was, because like guys they were like, okay, stereo, left, right. That's the way we're going to mix it. So Pet Sounds, in the sort of recent announcement with the reissues, everybody's talking about, the mono tapes, the mono masters. Now, there are people out there that prefer the stereo Pet Sounds, and they're like, Pet Sounds and stereos are revelation. We love it, But to me, it came out 30 years after the original album. And sort of, in my mind, I've always thought about it more as sort of colorizing a black and white film. Now, one could argue, would Hitchcock, and we're going to use film as an example, would Hitchcock have wanted that film to be in color had he had the opportunity to make it in color? I don't know, but I do know that Pet Sounds was enjoyed in mono, true mono, for 30 years before anyone really heard a true stereo mix of it. So to me, that's Pet Sounds. I've always preferred it that way, and to me, that's the real version of the album. Now, the other thing, and we talked a little bit about it, but the Beatles, of course, being sort of the big purveyors of the mono stereo thing. I've got a book that I refer to quite a bit on Beatle variations, the stereo mixes versus the mono mix. Now, I'm using Pepper as an example because when I first got into the Beatles, it was the late 80s, early 90s. Everything was stereo. If you've ever heard Sgt. Pepper in stereo, which I'm sure most of you have, particularly, those hard left and hard right, I mean, it was kind of fun to pan your speakers on each side to enjoy the album differently. But I'd always heard that the mono mix was the only way to hear Sgt. Pepper. And back in the 90s, mono Sgt. Pepper albums were highly, highly expensive. And I found a bootleg German CD of a mono Sgt. Pepper and finally got to hear it in mono. And it was eye-opening. It was very different. And of course, this is the mono reissue that came out in 2013 that has become quite sought after now. But the new stereo mix that Giles Martin did, those of you that are more familiar with that one that came out in 2017, I think he based it largely on the mono mix, like just the way the mono just feels and sounds, the punchiness, the sort of even the phasing of the vocals. The mono mix is definitely, to me, a trippier version of the album. And I won't say that the mono Sgt. Pepper is the only way to experience Sgt. Pepper, but it was a revelation to me, particularly when it came to the Beatles in mono and hearing a mono mix. This was the album that really made a believer out of me about it. I'd always heard, oh, the Beatles only mixed in mono. They didn't really understand stereo. It wasn't until, Abbey Road that they really embraced it. Well, yeah, I mean, those Beatle records, definitely different in mono. I won't say better. Different is the key. And I think, we all have our preferences. So I want to share a couple of mono records that just, to me, I like the mono mixes. And like I said, I'm not going to get into the whole ins and outs, but one of my very favorite records of all time, Buffalo Springfield, the self-titled album. This is an original mono on the Atco label. I bought this on CD when I first sort of heard this album, and it was a stereo mono twofer. The stereo mix, to me, the drums sound like they're on another planet. This mono mix just is concise. It's right there. Of course, this is a great album, no matter how you cut it. But yeah, the mono mix is the way to go. Now, another one that's funny, I'm going to hold it up and you're going to go, oh, this says stereo on it. Yeah, well, it does say stereo on it. But this is the John Coltrane, My Favorite Things. But this has this is the anniversary edition with the mono and the stereo, two versions inside of it. And I will say, you can A-B it, which makes this a nice set. But the mono mix, to me, is just, it feels more natural. You just feels like you're in the room, that they're in the room. John's sax just on the stereo mix sounds like it's more distant. It's not just present right there. So yeah, the mono mix of My Favorite Things by John Coltrane, preferred mix. And I'm going to show this one just because it's kind of fun. The Turtles. This is the Turtles Golden Hits. This is the Record Store Day version that came out from Manifest a few years ago, but it is mono. But they've since reissued these albums in stereo mono sort of sets. But Happy Together in mono, that classic single, is a great example of why mono records in the 60s are so great, because it's punchy, it's very present. You kind of, just washes over you, and it's a great little 2-minute single. But my goodness, the mono is just, and the thing is, if you grow up or you just hear the stereo over and over and you get used to it, you kind of accept that that's the way it is. But you got to think, when a lot of people first heard these records and these songs, they heard them in mono. They heard them on their car stereos, and they were mixed just to be played that way. There's a story, and I don't know if it's confirmed or not. I don't know if it was Brian Wilson or somebody used to bring the car stereo into the studio to make the mix. Maybe Phil Spector. I don't know. Tell me down there who did it, if it's even true that anybody did that. But it makes sense. How's my record going to sound when it comes on the radio? How are people going to hear it? And so some people might say, well, that kind of goes against the whole mono thing, because, any artist wants their music to sound as good as it can sound in that time. And so remixes are a good thing. It's like, if you've got the technology to do it, then do it. I don't know, but I will say that there are mono records that I just absolutely prefer to hear in mono. Now, another one, I didn't show it, but it's Piper at the Gates of Dawn. Now, that's the Pink Floyd album that people are really mixed about. That the stereo mix is actually the way to go with it, but there are people that will swear by the mono mix. I have both, and they are different. I can't say that I have a preference on that one, but they're different. I'll leave it at that and just say that and be done with it. But anyway, best in mono, that's what the phrase means. That's what it's about. You guys comment below. What do you think? Are you a mono fan or you're a stereo fan? Do you have a preference? Is it just whatever's on and whatever you've got? A lot of people, they just stream, they just dial up whatever it is and they play it. And that's cool too. I think any way you can enjoy the music and anything that's going to draw you in as a listener, no matter, old, new, remixed, remastered, however you want to do it, it's all like how we want to perceive it. So what do you think? Comment down below. Let me know. I always love interacting with you guys. And thanks, Sam, for the idea for the video. And we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.